Okay, today we're going to be talking about the age of absolutism. And as you watch, you need to be taking notes, and there will also be questions that will pop up during the video for you to answer. Okay, so some vocabulary. I want you to stop the video for a second, take some time to write these down. Okay, I'm going to run through them, but you'll need to stop the video so that you can get them down. So an absolute monarch is a ruler with complete authority over the government and the people. Divine right is the belief that king's authority comes from God. An intendant, royal officials who collected taxes, recruited soldiers, and carried out Louis XIV's policies in the provinces. Balance of power. Goal of maintaining a distribution of military and economic power between the nations of Europe to prevent one nation from dominating. Limited monarchy. Constitution or legislator limits the monarch power. And habeas corpus. This is the principle that states a person cannot be held in prison without being charged with a crime. Okay, so here we go. Overview. Many rulers of nation states that emerged from the late medieval period embraced absolutism or the concentration of power in the hands of a monarch. Many monarchs believed that their power came from God by what was known as divine right, and they were not responsible to any group or institution for their actions. This is the divine right theory. This is how this whole argument is made. Okay, a guy named Jacques Benin Boucher, who lived from 1627 to 1704, reinforced the medieval notions of kingship in his theory of the divine right of kings. He argued that certain kings ruled because they were chosen by God to do so, and that these kings were accountable to no person except to God. Okay. Bossuet, however, was reacting to an extreme situation and carried this argument to its furthest extent in his doctrine of the divine right of kings. Not only did God bestow power on certain monarchs, and he argued that his king, Louis XIV of France, was one of these, but the bestowal of this power legitimated autocracy or rule by one person. The king ruled by virtue of God's authority. Therefore, he should be obeyed in all things. No group, whether they be nobles or a parliament or the people in the street, have a right to participate in this rule. To question or oppose the monarch was to rebel against God's purpose. This doctrine of absolutism would follow a tortured course through the 18th century, culminating in the French Revolution in 1792 and the beheading of Louis XVI, grandson of Louis XIV, the King of France. So, here's the basic idea here, is that the kings were God's earthly representatives. The king represents God's will. The king's word therefore equals God's will, and therefore the king can do no wrong. It's good to be the king. Okay, some examples for you. Absolutism in Spain. Philip II, ruled from 1556 to 1598. He expands the Spanish Empire and defends the Catholic Church through the Inquisition. He controls all aspects of government, and he ruled by divine right. He believed God gave him the power to rule. And he said Spain, and under his rule, Spain has a golden age. As conquistadors conquered Latin America and bring in all the money from Latin America. Okay. After Philip, Spanish rulers of the 1600s lost the support of the people as they spent too much time at war and overtaxed their citizens. Their wars were predominantly wars of religion to kind of roll back the tide of the Reformation. Philip himself got embroiled in a series of wars with Elizabeth I of England, culminating in the Spanish Armada, which you may have heard of, which is the destruction of the fleet that he sends to invade England and throw Elizabeth out and put his wife back on the throne, Mary. Okay, best example of a divine right absolute monarch is Louis XIV of France. Okay, he is the poster boy for absolute monarchy. He called himself the Sun King. He believed he was the center of all mankind, and he would say, "L'État est moi," which means "I am the state" in France. Kings became sovereign or supreme in power within the borders of their nation, and there's no authority above them. Okay, so by the late 1600s, France had replaced Spain as the most powerful nation in Europe. During the reign of King Louis XIII, the father of the 14th, and his chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu, this guy down on the bottom here, the two groups who did not bow to royal authority, the nobles and the Protestant Huguenots, were defeated. The French army becomes the strongest in Europe. Okay, Louis XIV inherits the throne in 1643 as a 5-year-old child. He took the sun as his symbol and became known as the Sun King. His most famous quote, as I said before, was "L'État, c'est moi." It means I am the state. He rules France for 72 years. His court preacher, who I have already messaged, Bishop Jacques Boucher, argued that Louis was God's representative on earth and was entitled to unquestioning obedience. During his reign, Louis expands the bureaucracy by appointing tax collectors and recruiting soldiers to rule in his provinces, built the lavish immense palace at Versailles outside of Paris, organizes the strongest army in Europe, persecuted Protestant Huguenots, depriving the nation of many of its hard-working and prosperous citizens because they just leave. They get the heck out of Dodge. Okay, under Louis XIV, France is a wealthy power state with a great cultural influence. Louis's parties and wars left France in debt, however, and the peasants are starving. The monarchy after Louis will survive less than 100 years after Louis's death. Okay, and this is a copy of his palace at Versailles. You can imagine that this cost a little bit of money to build this. Okay, it's extravagant. He forced his nobles to live there at Versailles so that he could keep an eye on them more than anything. Okay, so make sure you've answered all the questions in the video, and we'll discuss in class. So make sure you have your notes done.